I replaced Undying and put in Hemomancy, and overall the change has been pretty substantial, and I would definitely recommend everybody else does that if they're playing a Pulverize build as well. Undying gives you 3% of your health back whenever you use a skill, and there's no internal cooldown, so when you attack faster or more often, you'll actually get more benefit out of it. I had been running that since Stormclaw, and the reason for that is Stormclaw's very fast attacks, and this adds up to an enormous amount of health. With Pulverize, we're not often attacking, and sometimes we're actually kiting, especially on higher tier Nightmare dungeons. So you get a little bit more benefit from Hemomancy's ability to do 1% health regen for every mob on the screen. On top of that, you get a little more damage from the AoE physical damage, and that's a nice benefit as well. This is a tier 79, and the other day we showed off a higher tier, I believe it was a tier 98, and I mentioned that I often farm between 70 and 80. Well, this is a good chance to show off that gameplay and let you know that no, the build is not boring at those difficulty levels. Once you can one-shot the screen and run around and you don't need to worry about every single mob that's chasing after you, it becomes a little more enjoyable. Do I think that the gameplay is a little stale at the really high Nightmare dungeon levels? Yeah, I think that the majority of people playing this build do. I actually plan to swap to Vamp NATO, which I saw recently on a tier list for Moxie, and I'm looking forward to trying that out as I kind of get the rest of the pieces together, at least at adequate levels to kind of show the build. But that looks like it's got very good survivability, so I thought that would be a nice change of pace and a good way to show off a different build for anyone who's still looking for something that survives better. In the case of Pulverize here, you'll see it's one-shotting the screen is basically what we're going for. And you don't have to farm tier 79 or 80, it's whatever your character is comfortable at. Just make sure that you're clearing the screen and leaving only what you can basically take hits from and still survive. So the idea here is to clear as much as necessary, get towards the objectives, without kind of lingering and slowing you down. And once you can do that, the build is pretty fun. You're dodging enemies, you're killing mobs, you're picking up loot, you're moving around, and it's enjoyable. You're not just kind of doing that dance that you see a lot of times in the tier 100, or you see the handbook footage of bosses or seasonal bosses or Uber Lilith where they get one shot. You know, you get a lucky string of overpower crits, the boss is just dead, and wow, this is the most amazing build you could ever see. Well, there's some other things that go into it, right? You have to go through the dungeons where you don't get all those. In this case, I could have left that room on the first Pulverize because I one-shot the objective. I just chose to clear the room just to kind of see if any more loot would drop that I had interest in. So again, we're just kind of quickly moving. I don't have to be as conservative with things like trample or even my evade charges. I can use these as mobility as well as just general speed increases to get through. Make sure I don't get blown up by the abomination there, which I did take a hit from. I'm going to take another hit there as well. And we will have to backtrack slightly in this direction just to get this last round bell. But as you can see, it does a lot of damage, and again, just farm whatever you're comfortable with. If your damage numbers are lower, then that's all you have to do. Just adjust what you're doing to make it effective. For the sake of being thorough, I do want to include some gameplay from a tier 98 today as well, and this is just so people can compare the health pool as to the one yesterday. And if you didn't see the video yesterday, I'll leave that in the description as well, so you can check that out if you'd like. But the general idea here is just that my health pool is going to be somewhat stable, at least for a really high tier Nightmare dungeon. And Pulverize in general lacks some survivability, and I think that's pretty well known at this point. And essentially you're going to survive through dealing damage or wiping the screen. With the changes we made by adding in Hemomancy, that life pool stays a little bit more topped off, and that's just because every time it procs, which is every 4 seconds, I'm getting a big chunk of health back, as opposed to just 3% increments, which you would normally get from the Undying Pact. And here you'll see I take a little bit of damage, but I should regen right there when the Hemomancy procs, hitting even the enemies that were on the far right or the top right of the screen. And it's just a really nice way of keeping that health pool topped off and letting you be a little more aggressive, as opposed to just constantly dancing around and worrying that you can't do anything unless you have Spirit and Pulverize and Overpowers up and all these nice things that make the build work. You can kind of move forward, and I'm not killing every single enemy like I had to do yesterday in order to keep myself alive. In fact, I can even use trample as mobility there as opposed to just kind of saving my life when needed. So overall, you can see it's going to basically play like this throughout the entire dungeon. But for the most part, it's been nice. If I can get into that suppressor mob, we can just basically wipe them all out. And the next proc here is going to again bring my health pool back up, so I don't necessarily have to worry about not being at full life 100% of the time, but in general, I always want to be over about 50%. Otherwise, I definitely feel pretty vulnerable. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.